Andy Rose. What's up, brother?
What's up, brother? How you doing, man?
Man, it feels like it's been a hot minute since we've done one of these, yeah?
Well, you dumped me, and it broke my heart. But
Ah,
I'm glad you took me back.
no, we didn't dump each other. Life got busy, bro.
Yeah, man. That shows. We try to be consistent with this stuff, but definitely, life does get in the way sometimes.
We will
Business gets in the way
blame
and
the Marine
whatnot.
Corps birthday. We'll blame the Marine Corps birthday because that's what started it. Then it was like holiday after holiday after holiday. So,
Well, I mean, yeah, my November and December is between birthdays. My birthday, Marine Corps birthday, Thanksgiving, the holidays. I got birthdays in December for kids and whatnot. So yeah, it's definitely a busy, busy time period.
yep. Well, it's good to see your face, man. What have you been up to?
Uh, Hustling, man. The market's definitely changed, so we're digging in, trying to find those buyers and sellers out there that actually still need to buy and sell real estate. So it's definitely a different mindset and a different time period than it was even a year ago, much less a year and a half, 2, 3 years ago. So it's actually normal. I mean, we're back to doing normal things. We've got to dig into our databases and contact everybody and try to put out their correct information, which is why we're here today.
Yeah,
So
man. I mean, you and I, you called me out of the blue last week, and I'm like, oh my god, it's been like 3 months since we've talked. What is going on here? You know,
he's
so
back.
yeah, we just kind of caught up. I mean, there's some cool things going on in your life. I mean, you're on a weight loss journey right now, aren't you?
Yeah. So last year I dropped about 40-ish pounds over the holidays. I gained a few back. So taking some of that back off again. But yeah, definitely, you know, being so crazy busy, didn't pay attention to diet and exercise and all that like I should have. And then when I realized that certain things weren't fitting properly anymore and I felt like crap, I realized that I needed to. I can't get back into boot camp shape, but I've always been a well-rounded Marine. So let's make that roundness a little smaller.
It's your head, man. Your head is nice and round.
Yeah, exactly.
So during our conversation last week, we kind of talked about the changing of the market. You alluded to it earlier in the conversation, but um, we have seen the return of the seller concessions,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's been awesome. So towards the end of last year, some of my deals, my listings, the sellers were giving money to the buyers, and it's just the way the market is. You've got to give some kind of incentive for the buyer to actually offer on your property if the price is right, or you're taking less for it. But you still got to give incentives for some of the buyers because there's more inventory. So they have more competition to get these buyers.
Did I
Um,
just hear you right? You say there's more inventory?
yeah, it's creeping up. So the crazy thing is, typically we say 6 months of inventory is a balanced market, right around 6 months, 6, 7 months. I would say because of this great reset that we've had over the last few years, that 3 months of inventory is a lot, and we're hovering in that 3 month range. And shoot, there for a while, anything around two was great because we were seeing stuff that was 1 month of inventory or less for quite a while. So getting those twos and threes worth of months worth of inventory has been great. And there's some areas, some pockets that are seeing more than that. So if you got your house on the market, it's been sitting there, you got to lower the price to encourage buyers to come in and then say, hey, we're willing to give this amount towards closing cost. So,
Well, why is it important for me as a home buyer to understand the inventory that's out there?
well, it's your options, right? You want to know how many houses are on the market that fit your criteria. Not every house is going to fit your criteria, but the more that do in your price range, the more houses that meet your criteria, the more options you have. And buyers having options, it helps them out. Not necessarily great for the sellers because the sellers are going to have more competition. They've got to go and get these buyers. So when they see that these other houses aren't selling, buyers want to jump on those just because there's more to look at. It's
Well,
not,
yeah,
it,
what I'm
you
getting
know,
at. the market that we're in right now versus last year, right? So the difference is last year there were very few houses, but the same amount of buyers, right? So the sellers essentially
Well,
carried the kingdom, right?
let's push back on that. There's actually less buyers, right? I say there's less buyers. There's a lot of buyers watching on the sidelines. Okay. Now, when that inventory picks up and the rates start trickling down, which is what has happened, right? Then those buyers come off the sidelines. There's a lot. I mean, last week we saw the 25, almost 25% jump in applications. Of course, the week before that was almost historical low of applications, but because the rates are ticking down, the inflation numbers are actually looking good. So that altogether has pushed buyers back in the market. Plus, it's the seasonality of it too, right? Usually it's this time of year it's slower, but a buyer knows that, hey, in the next few months, I want to start looking at a house to purchase. So I'm going to go ahead and prepare now. So that way I can jump when I see the house. So that's essentially what we're seeing right now. Some of this is seasonality. Some of it is just the way we're reacting to the market, and the market is changing. Market's always changing, but the way it was for the last 2 years, 3 years, definitely different. Definitely different. There's some normalcy to this market, which is good.
Yeah. And what we're talking about, seller concessions, is, I mean, what is concessions? It's a thing of value added on top of the transaction by the home seller. So this is essentially us asking for the home seller to pay for our closing costs, right?
Well, yeah. So typically that's what you think of. Like, on our contracts, it says, seller will pay such and such towards closing, right? It's not necessarily the specific closing costs, but towards closing. And then when you talk about VA, the VA has certain closing costs that the buyer cannot pay. The seller doesn't necessarily have to pay them either, right? But it's something the buyer definitely can't pay. But if a buyer is able to negotiate with their agent on the purchase of a house and get concessions, get money from the seller to pay for closing costs, okay, you've paid the closing costs. Well, what if there's extra money? What do you do with that? As a lender, what are you looking to do with it?
Well, it depends on how the agent wrote it up in the contract, right? So if you write up, if the agent writes up 3% applied to closing costs, guess what we have to do now? All that money has to be applied to closing costs because we're legally bound to that, right? But if you say concessions is a broad term. Concessions can be applied to anything. I mean, I'm looking at the VA lender handbook right now. You can pay for the VA funding fee. You can pay judgments and liens. You can pay off debts. You can pay for appliances. I mean, there's a lot of things that the VA concession rule allows for. All right. Now,
yeah, but there is a limitation when it comes to concessions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
correct. 4%. 4%. Now, the 4% rule is, this gets a little tricky. It's worded weird, so it's hard to really digest, right? I mean, yeah, I'll read it verbatim. Any seller concession or combination of concessions which exceeds 4% of the reasonable established value is considered excessive and unacceptable for VA guaranteed loans. Do not include normal discount points and payment of buyer's closing costs in total concessions for determining whether concessions exceed 4%. So
negotiation tactic, right? Would it behoove when the buyer agent writes the contract to have the money go towards concessions, right? Concessions and or closing costs. So that way, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that way the lender can apply is up to that 4% onto concessions, and then if there's anything left over, can go towards closing costs. And that way you're using up all of that money that's available.
If you just write concessions, we can apply it to the closing costs. So what the 4% rule is saying is that once we pay off all of the closing costs and discount points and all those fees, then the 4% kicks in.
Right.
So
I said it backwards, but that's what I was
getting at. So it's a little weird in the wording, and it's very confusing, and there's a lot of misconception in the marketplace right now. So you can actually, I mean, in reality, there is really no cap to the 4% unless we get really deep into paying off stuff, right? I mean, so what the concession rule is saying is that the 4% does not apply to traditional closing costs.
Right.
Once traditional closing costs are covered by the concessions, then the 4% rule kicks in. So you can only use 4% above and beyond the closing costs traditional closing costs. I guess that's a better way to say it.
So what if there's money left over after that?
If there's money left,
can the veteran pocket any of that money?
yes, he can pocket the money that he or she put in up front. So you get reimbursed for the appraisal, home inspection, that kind of stuff.
Or earnest, yeah, he put in earnest money. He's put in appraisal costs. He's put in inspection fees. So there's that type of stuff. If there's money besides that, I know in the state of Georgia, our contracts were updated, and the way it's worded is that you could possibly pay the buyer agent commissions with the seller concessions. So very interesting, highly doubtful that you'll get to that point, because a lender is going to take as much money as possible and apply it to everything that they can within the guidelines of that loan type. On the VA, we know FHA can do some of the same things, conventional can do some of the same things, but the VA really allows more to be done with that money.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. I mean, paying off judgments and liens, I mean, that just blows my mind with concessions. Like you can pay off bad debts.
Right. Hey, they've got a really high DTI, right? I know VA is not DTI, but lenders still look at DTI. Yep. So what do? Hey, let's lower that DTI and take some of this leftover concessions and pay down on a credit card, a car note, any of that stuff. I think that's fantastic that they can do that. It's another reason that it makes the veteran buyer a stronger buyer, because they don't typically go into foreclosure.
True, because of all the other checks and balances. Another thing that we're talking about is, there's closing costs and down payment. There is a difference between the two, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many vets I talk to that I try to tell them about closing costs and what to expect. Your 12 months escrows of taxes, insurance, insurance, appraisal, all that stuff is all closing costs. These are costs specific to the transaction of the property, right? So every transaction, no matter the financing type, will have closing costs. Where the VA separates itself from the rest is that there is no other down payment requirement. It's just closing costs. FHA, you require 3.5%, conventional, even more. So closing costs.
And that's confusing for especially first-time home buyers that are veterans or active duty military that are using the VA home loan benefit. They're thinking, I don't have to bring anything to the table. Well, yeah, you do. Depending on how the deal is negotiated, you're not going to bring a down payment. It's 100% financing. However, there are fees to close the loan. Those Correct. You may have to pay if you're able to negotiate the seller paying for those and more. Then great. Then you don't have to bring money to the table. You might be able to walk away with money in your pocket, but be known that 100% loan doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to pay those fees to close the loan properly.
Correct. So there is a difference between down payment and closing costs, period.
Yes.
What was the last thing we wanted to talk about, Andy?
Let's see. I can't remember.
You know why? That's why I put you on the spot, man. No, that was it. We want to talk about closing costs versus down payment, which we just did. Seller concession rule. So closing costs specific to the transaction. Down payment is per loan program. Okay. Right. So with the VA, you only have closing costs, no down payment. I mean, you can put it on a down payment if you want to. That's where a real trusted advisor comes into play. Like, hey, what happens if you put 5% down? This is what happens, and this is what you're looking at as a clawback, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So there's another concession, right? You can put money towards principal. You can buy down the rate, or you can put money towards principal if there's any funds left over. There's
a whole bunch of things that we can do with it. We can buy down the rate. We can pay off debts. We can pay off collections and things. We can buy appliances. Sky's the limit, really. And concessions is just us asking the home seller to pay for our closing costs. All right.
Yeah.
But if you word it correctly, it can be applied to everything versus just the closing costs. So you want to make sure you're working with a trusted advisor on both ends, on the realtor end and the loan officer end, to make sure you're fully protected and they understand this.
What do we always say? who you work with matters, right?
Boom.
That's it. Who you work with matters.
Exactly. So that's all we got, man. I appreciate your
Yeah,
time, Andy Rose. How's Florida?
absolutely.
Are you down in
Say
Florida?
again. Florida. Oh yeah, definitely in Florida. Not my normal backdrop, not in my home office. But yeah, down here in Florida, networking and trying to drum up some business down here because hey, things are happening down here too. So,
Bro, you're just gonna hang out on the beach the rest of the day, you liar.
dude, we had nasty storms last night. It's still cloudy, overcast, and rainy. So no, I'm not hitting the beach today.
Oh, it's all good. All right, Andy, I appreciate you. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to either one of us. We're happy to help. We're here to be a resource for you. Let's go. Semper Fi, brother.
Hoorah.